So in this tutorial we're going to have a look at parallel blends inside Creo, and broadly speaking, a parallel blend is a shape that will transition from one sketched profile to another sketched profile. So this would be an example of a parallel blend at the bottom here, and as you can see, this shape transitions from a pentagon, a five-sided polygon here, up to a slightly smaller pentagon. So you can do more than that with the Parallel Blends tool, and we'll transition into some of the other options that are available in there in some of the later tutorials. But in this introductory tutorial we'll just be following the primer. So if you want to download this primer, it's available on ShoeSpace. We may explore one or two of the other options, but broadly speaking we'll stick to the primer in this tutorial. So let's get into Creo. As we've said before, every time you boot into a new session of Creo, you'll want to go down to Manage Session and select your working directory. So this will allow you to tell Creo where you want to save the files that you're going to create, because by default it will try and save them in the default location, which is normally the documents folder on the local machine. So you'll want to tell Creo where you need to save all your part documents, either onto a USB stick if you have one, or onto your network space. Is probably a good idea. So once you've done that, you want to create a new part document, as we've done before. Give it a descriptive name so that you can come back to it later once you've saved it. And then we're in the modeling interface now. So we're going to find the parallel blend feature, and it's actually not readily available on the shapes submenu here. It's one of the options that's hidden. So if you just click this down arrow and we select blend. And then, just as with all the other feature tools, if you are confident creating the feature and you don't need to access any of the extra detail to do with that feature, that's fine. You can start your sketching activity. But in this case we need to open this first tab, this Sections tab. And as you can see, the system's trying to draw our attention to this. It's coloured it in red, so that means it needs some input. And the input is inside this tab. So if we look at the tutorial again, the primer on this tutorial, what we're being asked to do is insert blend protrusion. That's essentially what we've done. These primers were written for a slightly earlier version of Creo, so you have to do a little bit of interpretation, but we've essentially inserted a new blend feature. And then it's asking us to select some of the options for the blend before we begin populating these boxes. So some of the options that it's asking us to set are set the blend type to parallel, regular section and straight section. So here's the straight section option. We've got to set that, and sketch sections rather than select sections. So that's all the options set, and what we're going to do now is we're going to create a sketch of that first pentagon profile. So we've got section 1 selected, which is the first sketch that we're going to create, and it's asking for some input in here. We don't currently have a sketch, so we're going to define a new one. So define an internal sketch. And when it says internal, it means internal to this feature. So in this case we're not going to create a sketch first and then point the feature at the sketch. We're going to create a sketch inside the feature itself. And I think we'll sketch on the top plane. It's important to note the direction of the arrow here, because that will be the direction of the blend feature. So again, if we look back at the primer, if we say that we are sketching section 1, then the arrow should be pointing upwards. if we're viewing the planes as we are doing there, and it's not pointing upwards, it's pointing down. So we can flip its direction by just clicking on the arrow, or we can use this flip button here. So we want the blend to transition from our initial section, our section 1, up to a slightly smaller section, which is section 2, and that should be up here rather than down here. So let's press sketch. And then the next thing that we can note is we can't see a specific pentagon tool here, so what we could start doing is trying to sketch out a pentagon using the line tool, but that would be quite time consuming, and there is actually a tool for doing this. It's just hidden inside this palette option here. So if we open that, you can see that the default tab in here is for polygons, which is what we need, and we need a 5-sided polygon. So if we double click on that, and then when we bring our arrow back into the sketcher window here, you can see that we have a small plus below the arrow, which means the next time that we click, we'll get a pentagon added to this sketcher window. So now that we've got that pentagon, we can close the palette down and then accept that pentagon, or if we needed to scale it at all or rotate it, we could do that in here, but let's just accept it. And then, as you can see, we're in the default sketcher mode of operation, where the system has put some weak dimensions in for us just to tell us where the part is, and it's also put some constraints in for us to ensure that all the sides of this pentagon all remain the same length, and that this bottom side remains horizontal. So what we're going to do is we're just going to click and drag this pentagon over the origin of the part, and it should snap. Let's try that again. What we may have to do if we want to snap it is we may have to add the coincident constraint ourselves. So if you select coincident from up here, pick the center point of the pentagon, and then pick the upright reference plane here, you can see that it's snapped it onto that upright, and then we have the coincident tool still selected, so we can do that again with the center point and the horizontal plane. So you can see it's been snapped over the origin. We can now deselect the coincident tool by just hitting escape. You can see that that deselected, and the only other thing that we need to lock down is just this dimension. It's just an arbitrary value that happened to be the size that we input the shape, but let's change that to 100. So it's 100 mil along one of the sides. So that's the first section done. So if we want to OK that, that's fine. The system won't display that, but what it will display is a depth value here. And essentially what this is allowing us to set is this depth here. So it's the distance that we're going to set between the first sketched section and the second sketched section. So it's essentially going to be the height of our part in this example. So let's put a figure in for that. Again, we can just drag that, but I think the figure that we'll put in to begin with, we'll just put 100 in there as well. So we've got the first section input, we've got the distance to the next section. So now what we have to do is open the sections tab again. You can see that section 1's now been entered. It knows that it has 5 sides. Section 2's now highlighted, and if we just click on there, what it would have told us is it's undefined. So we have to select section 2 and then click on sketch. It rotates our view round so that we're normal to section 1, and then we can put a second shape in. So let's get our palette back again. Let's go 5-sided pentagon. We have to double click on this, and then we can drop that pentagon in the window. OK that. Drag it roughly into position, and then we can add our constraints onto the center point there. So just the same as we did with the first section, coincident, we've still got the coincident tool selected, make it coincident with the horizontal as well. And then we can close the palette down. We can maybe we need to get out of the coincident tool, so we'll hit escape, and then we can enter a value for this dimension. Let's change that to just 40, and then we're happy with that section as well. So let's click on OK, and instantly what we get is a preview of the parallel blend that those two sections and that distance will create for us. So you can see that that's pretty close to the one that you're asked to create in the primer. And let's look at where we are in the process now. So we inserted it, we set our options there, we selected a sketching plane for that initial sketch, that's section 1. We chose the direction of the feature. We did flip it because it was going in the wrong direction. It was going down as we were looking at the view there. Stage 4, sketch section 1. See rule at top right. There's a few rules up here that you may want to read through, but we'll talk about those later. So we've okayed section 1. Section 1 is grayed out and becomes inactive. We went through that process, but because this is a slightly newer version of Creo, it doesn't grey it out, it hides it. Section 2 becomes active. We sketch section 2. We already entered the depth for section 2, and then we're in the preview of the feature. And if we're happy, we can click on OK. So let's do that. Let's click on OK. There's our parallel blend feature. You can see that if you open the feature up, the two sketches are inside the feature now, section 1 and section 2 they're called. And if we wanted to change anything about that in terms of the dimensions, we could right click on the feature and maybe just click edit, and then we can vary the depth there. We could type a new depth in, 150 let's say, and that adjusts. And then if we want to vary the sections, what we should be able to do is click on edit on either one of the sections, and we should be able to change these values as well. So you can see there that it updates once you've edited a section, gone into the section and changed the value, and the shape updates. So that's fine. What we've done there is we've sketched two of the same profile but at a different scale, because obviously these are both 5-sided shapes, and they're more than that, they're centered around the same center point. So you can see them viewed from above there. They're both around the origin, so you get this nice transition from one shape up to the next. But if we look at some of the other text in the PDF, each section must have the same number of lines or arcs or segments or number of vertices. We've fulfilled that. Sections must be parallel with each other. We've fulfilled that. Each section must have a starting point. These must correspond, or else the resulting geometry will be twisted. The starting point is marked with an arrow. Well, let's go and have a look at that in our particular example. So if we want to go back into the dialog that we had open when we created this blend, we can right click on the feature and then click on edit definition, and that takes us back into this dialog that we used to actually create the feature in the first place. So let's have a look at section 1. So we open the sections tab, click on section 1, and then just click on edit to edit the internal sketch that is section 1. So it takes us back into the Sketcher dialog, and as we go in we can see this arrow that's been discussed here. So what the system's done is it's picked one of these points on the edges of our shape, and it's selected that as the start point for the blend. But let's say we wanted to force it to use one of these other points. So if we go to one of the other points on the shape, just hover over the point slightly, click with the left mouse button to select the point. We now have the point selected, and then click with the right mouse button to bring up this menu. You may have to hold it for a second or two. And one of the options in here is start point. So if we click on that, you can see that the arrow's now moved from this initial corner round to here. So let's see how that has affected the shape of the parallel blend. So we can get out of the sketch now by clicking on OK, and you can see instantly what's happened now. What it's done is initially that start arrow was over here, and what that meant was there was an edge running from that start point up to a corresponding point on this top shape, whereas now what's happening, the arrow's transitioned over to here, which means the edge now runs from here back to that corresponding start point on that section 2. So you can see what the tutorial, or what the primer is talking about. If you don't ensure the start points align with each other, then you'll end up with a twisted parallel blend shape. And again, if say we wanted to correct that, we could go back into section 1 if we wanted and put the arrow back where it was, put the start arrow back, or we could go into section 2 here, which is the smaller profile at the top, go into that sketch and then do the same thing. So move this arrow along to this point here. So we'll do that again. We'll select the point first. If you hover over the point, you get a little tooltip telling you that you are actually on an end point, and then if you left click on there to select the end point, you can see that we've got a red target there, which is telling us that we've selected it. And then whilst over the end point, if you slow right click, you get this extra menu and you can select start point in there, and you can see the arrow transitioned from where it was to here. So if we OK that now, and you can see that we fixed the blend shape. So that's a critical point. Your start points must align with each other, otherwise the edges that result will be twisted around, and if that's not your design intent, then you must go back in and align the start points. So let's look at a few other of the notes on here. It's telling us about general blends that we'll cover in another tutorial, and a rotational blend, which again we'll cover in another tutorial. So that's the end of the parallel blend tutorial.